Okay, well, welcome to Show and Tell Holiday 2018. Thanks to all of you who brought stuff. It looks really boring, actually. But then that's what I think our 10-meter net is like. And all of you who check in regularly on the 10-meter net, you know it's boring. But I think this will be actually pretty interesting. There's some great stuff over here. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to invite, start over here at the end, at this end, and invite whoever bought it to come up and tell us about it, show it to us, and then pass it on to the next person. And what I'd like to do is ask each of you to limit your telling to about 5 minutes, if you would, or less. Doesn't have to take that long, so we can march through all this stuff and get done by midnight. Anyway, who brought the stuff here on the end? I notice there are a lot of slide rules, by the way, and you all know what slide rules are, right? Okay, well, please introduce yourself to the club, and then just carry on.
All right, so Howard Cunningham, WWS.DBC. Someone said bring slide rules, so I brought mine. One day I'm going, but it does need they do need calibration. Now, this one is slightly off. Maybe that's why I think it doesn't matter. At any rate, yeah, the numbers have to line up, and there's screws. You can diddle on it. I keep threatening to put this in a shadow box with a note that says, "In case of power failure, break glass." And of course, you know, in college we had this, and it hung on your belt. Okay, but of course that went away, and then we had this. It's not the scientific, but this is a Texas instrument, and it still works. I mean, it's not a scientific version. I couldn't find my Hewlett-Packard scientific calculator. I did find the HP programming calculator, but anyway, it still works. I had to buy batteries for it today. And last but not least, the other thing on this table that's really rare, I have a really rare QSL card up here. One of the hams at Heath. How many people have this card? Got one. It's rare. Of course, Heathkit went out of business 30 years ago. And for those of us that worked at Heath, and I did, they provided QSL cards for us. So that's why I have one of the hams at Heath.
How about that? Great. Okay. Thank you. Next.
Thanks, Mike, for putting this on. This is extra stuff here with the ham radio coloring books from Dayton, but that wasn't what I brought here. How many people know what a vacuum tube is, or have heard of vacuum tubes?
Yes.
The original transistor. Oh, I forgot to bring the 807. That would have been a good story.
Oh,
But-
yes.
There's two of them in here.
Okay, Mike can pick up. He can pick up on that one. Anyway, my buddy gave me this Hickok 539C tube tester. It's a laboratory model. It was the latest, greatest, I guess, back in the day. I think in the 50s, maybe. This has got the NASA calibration on it. So I go, whoa, NASA. But you've heard of space age technology, right? Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Well, I found out that just means that it happened since 1957. So, you know, that took the thrill of it away.
Call it heritage.
Now, this is a little bitty light bulb with a filament in it, which kind of shows how vacuum tubes work. They have a filament inside that heats up and it puts out electrons that provide the juice, technically speaking. And this tube here I thought might be interesting to bring in. It's a 5692, which is a mil-spec version very similar to the 6S and 7 GT, which was used in early guitar amps. It was replaced later with the dual triode 12AX7, but the 6S and 7 apparently it was a really common tube, and I haven't seen one of those old guitar amps yet, but that's what I heard. This tube 5692 was used in the turret of Army tanks. And it has triple mica. It's super rugged, 10,000 hour filament. These are highly prized. The guitar guys love to put them in their amp because they go, this will never go bad.
Yeah, it probably won't.
And then I guess I could show it later, but I brought in some various other vacuum tubes, and I probably need to keep it shorter. There's some interesting ones in here, and then this one I can show. It's set up for the testing, so if anybody's interested in a tester, it can, yes?
Does the new tester work when you stand by for after the meeting?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, I calibrated it recently and had a lot of fun figuring that out. So I can pick, this might even be a good sight gag here, if I don't get electrocuted. I'll turn off the power. But I haven't put the screws back in after calibrating it. And I thought, well, it might be interesting to see this rat's nest haywire. This is not a circuit board.
Oh, no!
The knob fell off.
Oh, not the two, I hope.
Yeah, I was hoping it wasn't that too. But anyway, because for decades I've worked as a technician on 2 dimensions on flat circuit boards, and lately surface mount stuff. I had a terrible time in 3 dimensions when I started working on this. It's like,
Can you make this a little longer?
okay, here's my spokesman. Thanks. Just have a police whistle next time. Okay, thank you.
All right, John, thanks.
Thank you.
You want to carry it? Okay.
Yeah, I brought a couple of toys I thought some people might find interesting. This, believe it or not, is puts out 1/10 as much power as our common handhelds now. Puts out a massive half watt on the best day you ever had. But it's it's the first FM portable push-to-talk radio that anybody in the United States ever had. You've seen the one in Saving Private Ryan, the handheld, and then the backpack is the BC 1000. It also put out a whole half watt. It weighed pounds. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. It weighed about, the BC 1000 weighed about 30 pounds. So this was a technological marvel. This thing only weighs about 8 or 9 pounds. weighs almost as much. Technically, a wonderful piece of hardware. Half microvolt sensitivity, 50 kilohertz deviation, absolute operational failure because of batteries. It just would not function in a battle. I actually had these stupid things in the early days of Vietnam, and they very quickly ended up in the bottom of rice paddies, creeks, and they were an operational failure, but a technological marvel. You know, thanks to Fort Monmouth, they did a great engineering job, but it just didn't cut it. But if you want to go figure out what this thing weighs, my other little toy here was a Globe Chief 90. And the attraction for me anyway was this thing would easily exceed the 75 watt limit for a novice. It would burn out 100 watt light bulbs, believe it or not. You couldn't leave the key down too long. But the one I had, I never needed a side tone. I was telling Ron Payne the other day, I never needed a side tone generator because the transformer hummed so loud that it just gave 120 hertz. I could hear myself keying. It was just fine. I saw a hand, sorry.
Yeah, what year was that military radio?
It's a PRC-6. They were designed about 51, 52. They showed up at the tail end of the Korean War. I think for some purposes they probably were useful, but it was a company and platoon level radio. It never made it, really never made it down to the squad level. It was just too big, too heavy, too expensive, etc. But an interesting toy, and if you look at it, the thing's got about 13 tubes in it. They're all the little pencil tubes, and of the size of the box, how much do you think is battery and how much is radio? Make a guess.
60% battery?
Probably closer to 70, 75% battery. The radio is actually from about here up. Just, yeah, 60% is a good call. But interesting toy, and they actually work. I put 2 of these things together years ago and made them work with a whole 9-volt batteries to create 90 volts for the plate, and it really worked.
Here's one of the
Yeah, here's one. Here's one of the pencil tubes with
brand new 1948.
with the for this thing. Actually, the reliability was probably so bad that they clipped the leads off so you could change the tubes. They actually had sockets. This is one for some other circuit that where you actually soldered the tube in place, which must have been wonderful to try to do maintenance on. Anyway, schematic up here if you want to look at it. It's kind of a neat old radio. I found one at a ham fest one day, and I said, I got to have an old radio. Next, who's in the batter's box?
Dennis, W4ZOR. I brought some old stuff in here too. One thing I'm real happy with, this code practice oscillator. My 3-year-old grandson was hammering on it yesterday. There's a brilliant future waiting for him. But what's even better is he likes the light bulb better. So everyone around the home also likes the little light bulb lights up. So you don't have to listen to it, but at this point he just likes to see the flashing light, you know. And it's interesting too, because I bought a box full of junk. Some old guy they're selling his stuff off, and I paid $5. At the bottom of that box was this made in Japan key over here, probably from the late 50s, early 60s, but it matches the exact one that's on the front of the brochure that Heathkit had. So that's kind of neat. They belong together. So here's another fine product from Japan and other estates. It's the age of the silent key right now. You know, you just swoop in and all kinds of goodies out there. But this 92-year-old lady passed away. Her husband was a decorated Marine. He fought in the Pacific, and apparently he bought this when he was stationed somewhere out in the Far East. I think it's Mitsubishi National Home Speaker. Wonderful UFO-looking thing, but it's an 8-ohm speaker, and it works real nice with my IC707 transceiver. They're kind of neat looking. And as far as the slide rules things, this was my dad's. Hungarian immigrant, and he got it from another Hungarian immigrant, looking at the name on here. And unfortunately, he wanted me to be an engineer, and I joined the Navy instead at 19. But I still have it. Pretty neat stuff. And then here's a calculator. This is from a neighbor of ours up in Long Island, where I escaped from back when I was 19 years old. And this one was made by the NCE Nuclear, which is kind of cool, an atomic calculator. But one of the very early ones. I'm sure Ron's probably seen this before. He's got one in his works, right? And inside the case was a 1953 penny, a wheat penny, which was really neat. His lucky penny I got with it, you know. And various other little paper slide rules for figuring radio range out and other stuff if you want to take a peek at it. Enjoy yourself. But anyway, that's it I have for now. So who's up next? The Wi-Fi... Up. Oh, there you go. Is that yours? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't throw this on.
And here's Gary.
Not very good at trying to maneuver 5 things at once, but I brought a box of a few different things. So the big thing I found was my Dick Tracy radio. Not sure if anybody ever had one of these, but the date on it is 960. It was a 39 megahertz walkie-talkie, and it came with a, it has belt loops on it. You can put the belt, the push-to-talk button is here, and then this was on your wrist on a wristwatch type band. And there was a wire that went between the microphone and this, and so it didn't have Bluetooth back in '62. So, well, I used to talk and had a lot of fun with that. And it's kind of interesting how it triggered some other thoughts and events in life, but I ended up going into federal law enforcement for my first career, and so maybe this was a impetus for me to get into radio and into law enforcement. What else have I got here? Here was my Munkel authorized personnel ID kit, and so that brought me into my second career, which was in intelligence community. And so I did that for 25 years. And then just a couple other small things I found. This was a calculator I used in college the first time, HP 35C LED. I used that when I was going through accounting school. And then later on, I ended up going to engineering school. And so somewhere in this plethora of other stuff is what I use in engineering school, which was an HP 15C.
Oh, yeah.
Which is still my favorite today. And in case anybody's interested, there's an app you can get for the iPhone or the iPod Touch for the HP 15C that mimics.
Yep. I got an HP 42S.
Very cool, very cool. And then I also had a slide rule I used in high school, I guess it was. And then the last thing I'll talk about is this radio. This was a Motorola lunchbox type radio used when I was in law enforcement, and here, and I worked for Treasury, and so I worked for the IRS as a criminal investigator. And during the election years, we used to supplement the Secret Service with manpower. When all the candidates were running, they just didn't have enough manpower. So I got a chance to use one of these in a control tower of an airport to monitor the snowstorm aircraft coming in for a landing to give the agents on the ground tip off before the plane landed. So anyway, many other pieces and parts here, but that's the main thing. So whoever next.
Hello. Yes, I'm Mark, N4 Echo Tango, and I'm going to be talking about something new, not all the old stuff that's all the rest here on the table. My problem at my shack is my attic. I live in a HOA-controlled area, and so I'm limited to where my antennas can be. My problem was when I wanted to switch antennas, to run up to the second floor where I had my antenna switch. So I'm got wore out doing that, and so what I did is I tried to find a modern solution, and I was able to find a Wi-Fi controlled switch. It has 4 ports to it, and it's got a Wi-Fi module that you can communicate with from your any Wi-Fi device. You can program it, and the only thing you have to supply is your 5 volts to it, and program it to which antennas, and they have a little app that you can put on either your phone or computer if you have a Wi-Fi on your computer as well. So this is still in the works. I have not implemented yet, but it's hopefully saves me at least 2 flights of stairs going up and then 2 flights coming down. So that's it. Who's next?
Thank you. Yes, there we go. Scott, KD4EBL. I have the slide rule my grandfather used in Cornell, so it's over 100 years old. And it may work, it may not. Couldn't figure out where the batteries go. So someone brighter than this can have to do it. The other thing I have here is a Collins KWM2A, which isn't that great? Well, guess what? This was part of somebody's donation for Winterfest. So you can come buy this beautiful piece and get it the heck out of my garage. Oh, and but no, in all seriousness, I'm kind of doing a commercial here. If you hear people that have donations that they just looking for a good home, and we have other people in the club that will take it, hold it for Winterfest, and sell it there. We also do consignments at Winterfest. So if you don't want a whole table, but you may have a rig or something else, you can put it on the table, and for a small percentage, the club will sell it for you. And so this is my little advertisement. But we have some beautiful things this year, but both on consignment and donations to the club. And someone said yes, it is a season for silent keys, unfortunately, but there's also some good things to have out there if you're looking especially for a boat anchor or a tube set. We have lots of them out there. And I'm the shortest one. That's it. Winterfest is March 24th, 2019 at Nova. Next.
Probably me.
It's the mother of all slide rules. Ooh.
Okay, we'll start with this slide rule, which was the one that I used in college. It's not the brand you usually associate with engineering and such. It's a Lafayette, but it worked quite well. It also, with the help of this, nearly got me arrested once, but since we're limited to 5 minutes, I'll skip that. People can catch me later. 20-inch one for higher resolution. This one I did not really use, and I need to make a replacement part for the cursor there. It's broken and it doesn't stay in alignment. That one was left at work by somebody who retired, and I couldn't leave it there. This is the one that really stresses my pockets. I got it at an antique dealer, I think. It works. It's not as high resolution as you'd expect from the size, because all the lines are printed, not engraved. But if you want to show somebody how to use a slide rule, this is it. It's got a couple of eyes that you can hang it from the from someplace. I've got it hung over a doorway at home normally. That we'll skip that aircraft instrument, HSI, horizontal situation indicator, came from Hamfest at Berryville. Many years later, the amplifiers that go with it came via eBay from Germany. Apparently, these were used in the F4. A lot of F4s went to Germany, and they've been retired, and they've been selling off the various repair stocks that they kept. So this was $5. This was $100. And the documentation, which I finally found, mil-spec documentation, including the schematics, which is all I bothered to bring, was over $40. Yeah, whatever. There are more slide rules here, a cylindrical slide rule. Does the owner want to come up and speak about that? And Bill's whiz wheel is in the next collection.
Yeah, so Mike had mentioned the slide rule, so I figured I had one that was probably somewhat unique compared to the others. This is from Britain. It was designed in the 20s and sold up through the 70s, but it's actually done as a spiral around the cylinder so you can carry the whole thing in your pocket. And this is actually the longest slide rule on the table. It's 66 inches, but it's just all compact and does log as well in the middle. So this was used by my grandfather at Vauxhall Motors over in the UK to design vehicles. It's the equivalent of D and L. It's not labeled like that, but it's a, yeah. And Bill? Oh, he's got a circular one here that's as well. And I think this is your stuff here, Mike?
Okay, well, I brought some slide rules. Those of you who read the reflector have already seen pictures of mine. The high school slide rule. My parents gave it to me, gave me a huge advantage senior year.
Same brand as mine,
Yeah, it's a Pickett.
a little more portable.
It's an aluminum, kind of a cheap slide rule, but it worked well. I took it to the Naval Academy. They made me send it home. This is one they issued there. Everyone had to have the same slide rule. No advantage. Everybody, but I knew how to use mine, which was a big help. And so I used this for 4 years, or one like it. Then when I went to grad school, Navy grad school, I had been to Westpac and picked up a real nice bamboo slide rule in Japan. So this one helped me through grad school. But 2/3 of the way through that, the Hewlett-Packard HP 35 calculator came out. And they were about $400 retail. And the Navy Exchange at Monterey had them for $270. So my wife and I went down there, broke the budget, bought this. This one improved my grades a whole letter. And why was that? It gave me the same answers as this in trigonometry and all the rest of the math that I did on it. It gave me the same answers. But why do you think this would? There you go. It told it was unambiguous where the decimal point goes. With the slide rule, you have to keep track of where the decimal point is, one way or the other in your answer. And if you miss that, you get the wrong answer. Anyway, so those are my slide rules. And if you watch the video that I sent you the link for, you'll hear a guy say that the HP 35 specifically broke the slide rule. The slide rule disappeared soon after this came out. This one is a full scientific calculator, and it just blew the slide rule right out of classrooms. Next. Alone on ice.
Watch your transmitter.
Okay. All right. I'll watch it go off the table.
I'll put it in my pocket. Make sure I don't run off with it at the end of the night. Okay, I read a book called Alone on the Ice, The Greatest Survival Story in the History of Exploration by David Roberts. 107 years ago today, who knows what happened that day? Anybody? Yeah, that was the day that Roald Amundsen, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, a Norwegian, first reached the South Pole. He's the first person to do so. This book is not about him. A month later, his rival, Robert Scott, an Englishman, reached the South Pole. Discovered that Amundsen had been there first, so at least we know they reached the same point. Navigation was pretty good. But this book is not about him either. This book is about a different Antarctic expedition, which was going on at about the same time. It was an Australian expedition, and it was not just the Antarctic expedition that discovered the most new land, but the expedition that discovered the most new land, period, in all of history. And most people have never heard of it. They wanted to explore pretty much all of the part of Australia, all the part of Antarctica that was closest to Australia. So they sent a ship down, and they left off people at 3 places. There were 2 base camps in Antarctica, 1,500 miles apart, each of which was to send out small crews in different directions on dog sled or on foot. And they also left a crew at Macquarie Island, which was halfway between Australia and Antarctica, about 1,000 miles in each direction. And the reason for that, and the reason I'm talking about this in a radio club, is because this mission was the first use of radio in Antarctica. Now, unfortunately, the book does not go into much detail about that. Oh, and Macquarie Island was the relay point, because it was too far to go directly. It doesn't go into much detail about that, partly because the thing barely worked. It took them more than a year before they got online in Antarctica, and even then it was only at the 1 base camp, not exactly a portable rig. A very well-built base camp, by the way. It's still standing today, more than a century later. So because it was so windy there, they weren't able to put up the antenna for more than a year, which was certainly very frustrating to the relay station in Macquarie Island. By the way, you also might consider this the very first D expedition.
I understand Macquarie Island is still a very, very rare DX, probably because nobody's stationed there anymore, which they were for a long time. So anyway, it was more than a year before they put that up, and this goes into very little detail about the radio itself. Wikipedia says it was a Spark station, which is pretty darn obvious given the year, 1911 to 1914. They used Morse code exclusively, and please don't call it CW, it wasn't. It was Spark. Wikipedia, as I said, says it was a Spark station. That's pretty obvious. Unfortunately, nobody seems to know whether it was rotary spark, like on the Titanic, or something more primitive, or what the power was. Also, Wikipedia claims it was a shortwave station, which I think is very unlikely. I think it was almost certainly 500 kilohertz, like pretty much everything else at the time. They got a little bit of use of it for the middle 2 years, and then the final year, when they had winter over one last winter, 1913 and 1914, finally left just in time for everybody to get drafted into World War I. They had another problem, and that is that their radio man went insane. He would not let anybody else use the radio. It certainly helped that nobody else knew Morse code, but even when they started learning it on their own, he took an essential piece out of the rig and kept it under his pillow at night. So, and he spent the rest of his life in, oh, come on, hasn't been 5 minutes yet. Spent the rest of his life in an insane asylum. Only 2 people on the mission died. By the way, the cover here shows some of the better terrain. Everyone should get a close look at this before you leave. And let me mosey on over to the camera. I hope it can focus close up. That's not the worst terrain they encountered. The worst was lots of crevasses, deep fissures in the ice, which were covered over by enough snow that you couldn't actually see them until you landed in them. So amazingly, those only killed 1 person. Another person died by another cause. Now everyone on Macquarie Island ended up dead because the ship they were taking back to Australia sank on the way. But almost everybody else survived. The book mostly concentrates on Mawson, the head guy in the mission. He's apparently very famous in Australia, so much so he was on the currency for a while. And he lived until 1950s, unlike pretty much anybody else. Most of them died in World War I. And so anybody wants to talk to me about this. Also, I'm wondering if H.P. Lovecraft got his idea of insanity in Antarctica from this mission. I don't know. So who's next?
Okay, thank you.
The light keeps going on and off. Okay, there we go. I'm John, K1NME. As I said, I'm not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg, whether it's a genetic defect that caused me to be an engineer, or I got into ham radio at the age of 13, and that was the catalyst. But rather than bringing some ancient piece of equipment, my J38 key or something like that, the slide rule that I also have, I decided to show the impact of ham radio and my becoming an engineer. So this picture, which I'll leave over here, nobody can see the detail here. This is an MQM-33B drone, an Army drone from the 60s. It is the first aircraft ever shot down with a laser weapon, blown up, not blinded, blown up in 1973. So, purpose, okay? Very interesting question. I was part of the team at the Air Force Weapons Laboratory in Albuquerque, New Mexico that shot this down. I was there the day that we shot it down. The program director called the Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense called the President and said, Mr. President, I'm pleased to inform you that for the first time in the history of mankind, we've shot down an in-flight aircraft with a laser weapon. That was top secret at that point. 14 years later, the video from that was shown in an Air Force recruiting film on television, and I nearly had a heart attack. This photograph, I'll leave it up here for you to take a look at, is actually the first aircraft that was shot down. The one in that video was the second, because the first one was a mistake, okay? You can see on this photograph there's a big plastic sheet on the side of the aircraft which was to test the burn pattern. The laser didn't cause it to explode instantaneously. It took a second or two to burn through the fuselage and then explode the fuel tank. The wings separated, the engine separated, and the whole thing came down in a big jumble. But the tests before that, they wanted to take a look at the burn pattern, so they had this big plexiglass sheet on the side of the aircraft, and the plexiglass melted as the laser was transversing across it, jittering as the aim point varied. Well, it varied enough that it slipped off the plexiglass sheet to the fuselage section behind it, burned through the aluminum siding, and cut the control cables, and the aircraft crashed because the pilot on the ground lost control of the aircraft. But they never advertised that, in fact, this was the first aircraft shot down because it was a mistake. The piece of the wood on this photograph is the piece of the propeller from that first aircraft that was shot down. My entire career was always working on stuff 15, 20 years in the future. The regular Air Force guys considered me useless because I was always working on stuff 20 years off into the distance. Come on, Acton, produce something we can use now. Anyway, I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing a picture of the first aircraft. Yes, sir.
Did the drone fly into a fixed laser?
Negative. The whole purpose of the laser weapon program was to produce an airborne laser laboratory in a KC-135, a Boeing 707. If you go to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, you can see that aircraft there. There's a radar system up in the dorsal fin, which I was responsible for, called the HELRATS, High Energy Laser Radar Acquisition and Tracking System. The precision pointing and tracking system would track a thermal signature and aim point designate the laser with an offset to 10 microradians. A microradian is an angular measurement that at 1,000,000 feet, if you had a stick 1,000,000 feet long, 1 microradian means that the end of that stick is pointed to within plus or minus a half a foot at 1,000,000 feet. The laser pointing and tracking system we're talking about here demonstrated 10 microradian pointing and tracking. So what they were doing was tracking the thermal emissions of the engine and aim point designating back under the wing to burn through the fuselage and explode the fuel tank, which was precision machined to be the equivalent of an F-4 fighter wing tank. Okay? The Airborne Laser Laboratory in the late 70s shot down in-flight air-to-air missiles. Missiles moving at better than Mach 2. They tracked the thermal signature of the engine in the back, and they aim point designated to the seeker on the front of the missile and destroyed the seeker.
Is that assuming a side aspect or a head-on aspect?
It could be done either way. The geometry, I'm using up too much time. I'll be happy to talk to anybody who wants to do it, but suffice it to say, the airborne laser, which is a 747 version, that was done about 10 years ago. It's a solution looking for a problem.
I hate to do this, but we have a problem. We have to be out of here supposedly by 9 o'clock, and that means cleaning up. There's no way we're going to make that. But what I want to do is ask everybody who's still remaining here to be as brief as you possibly can. It's hard to stop talking because we're all ham radio operators, but you got to stop talking because we got 10 minutes to get everything out of here and we're not going to make it.
Very much so.
Can our club afford to buy her a new one of these?
To understand my antenna pattern. So I have an application that if you want to send me your ADIF file from, say, Logbook of the World, just send it to me by an email, waahz@arrl.net. I will produce it into a map that will show all the places that you've talked to in the world. That's the end of my speech. I would have demoed it, but I don't have the time. Send me a file, and I'll send you back a map. Yeah. Or I'll show you how to do the file, and you can do it yourself.
Hi, I'm Leon, MT8B. I didn't have anything electronic to bring, but I thought I'd bring something that we built at home. Those of you who have attended previous meetings might remember my son in particular has a big interest in 3D printing, and so we have a little homebrew 3D printer that we use for printing things. And my two boys and I got started on this little project, this little jet engine project. The model's available online from a place called Thingiverse. It's a two-stage high bypass engine. I just thought it was really cool, and we printed out all the parts and ordered a few of the bearings and put it together. So it's just, I brought it in as an example of what you can do with 3D printing. With the bearing system, it's the guy who designed. I can take no credit for designing this, but it's set up to behave like a two-stage engine. Sorry. It has the two spools from what I saw. Yeah, two-spool engine. So generic model. If you have any questions about it or 3D printing, let me know. So I'm done.
Hi, I'm George WB50YP. I brought a little box here. This was the first transistor shortwave converter. What you're supposed to do with this was mount it under the dashboard of your car. You disconnect the antenna from your car radio and put this in series with the antenna lead. It's a 5-band receiver with VFO and Q multiplier. It came out in 1956. It was the same people that brought out the first United States-made little pocket transistor radio, Regency. So Regency built this thing. It was on Popular Electronics cover in 1956. It cost $80, so certainly out of my price range at the time. Runs on 3 batteries in the back, so you don't wear out the batteries with the light. If you push the tuning knob in while it's on, it lights the dial so you can see in the dark in your car. But the idea is you just hook this up to your car radio, tune your car radio to about 1200 on the dial, and I was at home listening to 40-meter CW and FT8 on this thing before I brought it. So that's the deal. It's built out of 2 transistors and 1 diode. Back in that era, you were lucky to get transistors that would work at the top end of the broadcast band. And Philco came out with a thing called a surface barrier transistor. It would go up to 10 meters. And that's what this was built out. That was the key component in here. So there's one Philco surface barrier transistor, which is probably unobtainium these days, a crystal diode mixer, and there's another transistor that's a VFO I should say, and that's it. So you understood the schematics up here, and that's it.
If this is still working or not. Yeah, it's working now. This is my complete HF station, all the way from 80 to 10 meters, and it all